So today I'm going to be taking a look at one of the newest Oris releases. It is a rectangular dress watch that I think is very cool. I think the watch hasn't gotten much love. There hasn't even been an official post on the Oris Instagram account, which I think is weird, but it's right up my alley, so let's take a look at the watch. So we have a diameter of 25.5, lug to lug of 38 millimeters, height of 10 millimeters, and a lug width of 19. Some other general specifications for the watch: we're going to have the Oris caliber 561 beating away in here. It's basically just a rebranded ETA 2671. Not a movement I hear about a lot, but I assume that's just because it's a little bit smaller, and I don't know if it's quite square. I'm pretty sure it's a circular movement, but anyway, moving on. This does have a mineral crystal on the back, but thankfully sapphire crystal on the front. We do have a stated water resistance of 30 meters, but not a pool watch by any means. What's nice is on the face of the watch we do have BGW9 used, so you do have a fairly white leaning lume signature. And other than that, the watch retails at $19.50 directly from Oris, but I'm sure you can get somewhere between 10 to 20% at your local AD, pretty much no hassle. So looking at the dial here, we do have a very Art Deco feel. Lots of rectangles going on. We have the inner rectangle here, the outer rectangle. Some classic numerals at the 12, 3, and 9. 6 was omitted for a date window. And we have stick markers everywhere else. It's nice because they integrated the lume plots, I would say, very well. It doesn't look slapped onto the design. It looks very much purposeful. We do have these circular dots at every hour marker, and they are lume filled. So it's nice to see that it not only blends really well with the design, but it doesn't detract away from, I guess, the dressiness of the watch. Oris went here for a nice red coloration to the dial. It is somewhat of like an oxblood maroon color. It's not a sunburst, which I do like. It is more of like a shiny lacquer appearance. Not overly shiny by any means either, but you can kind of tell at certain off angles it does kind of lacquer to life. Pretty clean dial overall. We don't really have a lot of text. We just have Oris at the 12 o'clock there, and they're pretty standard Oris font, and Swiss made at the 6 o'clock here. I do think there's a little bit of emptiness in the dial here, kind of above the 6 o'clock. Any text there I think would have made the watch slightly more balanced, but as it stands, it is still nice, it is still clean, and I like that they didn't overdo it with text. The hands are pretty legible. I don't know if they are considered sword style hands or not. If they aren't, I'll correct it somewhere on screen. But the hour hand stays within its rectangular home here very nicely. It's very easy to read what hour you are in. However, the minute hand, while at the very sides, goes all the way out to the minutes track. It doesn't do that kind of at the ends here. And when it gets into this area, it can start blocking off certain minutes and start being a little bit difficult to read. So although you can get a good time range within 2 to 3 minutes, you won't necessarily know exactly what it is to the minute. So time telling is a little hindered, but at the end of the day, it is kind of the same way with most square watches and rectangular watches. And last but not least, I do like the date window at 6. Thankfully, they didn't put it at a weird position. Thankfully, they didn't put a cutoff 6 there. It would have been nice to have it like a red color match date, but because all the accents on the watch are white, it fits in with the white date window, so no complaints there. So zooming in on the dial, we do see we have kind of more of a speckled texture to the dial, or a speckled coloring to the dial. There are some areas of darker and lighter reds, although it is so fine, it kind of seems more cohesive on wrist. But it's a nice little detail. I'm sure it's just whatever the process is to make the dial. Looking a little bit more generally, we do see all the text, all the outlining, all the white fonts are done really well. There's a lot of depth to the Oris logo. There's a lot of puffiness and depth to the numerals, as well as just the regular like stick markers. It is really nicely printed here, and I don't really see any imperfections, which is refreshing. It is nice to see. Focusing on the hands right here, you do see that the white of the lume doesn't quite match the white of the rest of the text. However, that is just kind of the case with any type of lume. Just thankfully they went with BGW9, which matches a little bit better than had they gone with C3, which would have been much greener and detracted a little bit from the elegance of the dial. Looking at the hands themselves, which are really the only metal piece on the dial, they aren't perfectly done. As you can see, there is some speckling on the hour hand there, and then the minute hand, not as badly done, but they aren't perfect. There is a little bit of kind of roughness and fuzziness along the edges of the hands, but by no means anything terrible, but it's nothing ghastly, and it's nothing I wouldn't kind of expect at this price point. Date window, very nicely done. It is not very harshly geometric square cutout. It is a little bit more rounded along the corners, and the lacquerish finish of the dial kind of wraps around the edges, which is a really nice effect. Overall, really clean dial. I would say I'm the most surprised by just how nice, crisp, and how much depth all the printing has, and not too bad on Oris's part. Moving on to the case, and I think it is really well done here. One thing I immediately noticed just kind of upon picking up the watch and putting it on wrist was the stepping of the case. We do have the kind of central case here in this H that holds like the face of this watch and just kind of the bezel, I guess you could say. And then you have this kind of structure here that juts out a little bit from the watch. It's a step down, makes the case a little bit thicker. Overall, just adds a little bit of visual interest to the watch, which I think is a really welcome addition. Nothing too complicated with the finishing. We just have all polished along the watch, on the case sides and on the top, and just a signed Oris crown there. One thing to note, and something I do really like about the watch, is how just curvaceous every surface is. There is even a curve to the actual crystal itself. There is a curve to the watch body. There's a curve along the kind of bezel and arches of the watch. So there's a lot of shape and really no harsh angles that exist on this watch, which is nice. One kind of byproduct of that being that it fits well on the wrist and it is ergonomic, but it's also just an overall pleasing shape. One interesting part about the watch is on the case back, it is kind of sculpted up. It is kind of pyramidal in a way. I don't know if that's because they needed extra room for the movement, or it helps with wearability, or I don't really know, but it doesn't seem like the rotor is too far off from the crystal, so I assume they just kind of needed a little bit more room. Looking at the strap, it is very well done. We do have the quick release spring bars. It is a nice deep red color. I'm assuming this means it's vegetable tan, but I could be completely wrong. Either way, nicely kind of sealed on the side there, or burnished, or whatever that process is called. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, nice strap. It does wear in fairly quickly. Like right here, I haven't really worn the strap a lot, but there is some creasing along it. Which is fine. I think with this kind of style of strap, that more vintage, creasy aesthetic ends up looking good and looking nice on it. We have a nice signed Oris buckle there, and it's nice to see at this price point that the strap is really high quality and they didn't cheap out in that area, especially because it's kind of a big part of the watch, especially on a dressier watch. So moving on to how the watch wears. Earlier, I was wearing my 34mm Tudor Rose. And the reason I wore this is kind of, I think that this Oris wears very similarly to a 34mm watch. So I'm gonna try it on after, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. So here we have the Oris sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist, and it is by no means a big watch, but it is also a dress watch and a rectangular watch, and they kind of do wear a little bit differently than traditional circular watches do. And I think for the size and proportion of the watch, it fits really well. Trying the watch on a little bit below my wrist right here, I have closer to a 6-inch wrist, and I still think it looks great. You can probably go fairly small on this watch, probably 5 inches, maybe 4.5 honestly, and it would still look fantastic. Obviously depends on wrist shape and wrist length, but still a very well-wearing watch. What's really nice is because, again, you do have all those curves along all the surfaces on the watch, especially the crystal, it does have a very nice profile to the watch. It does conform nicely to the wrist. Although it is 10mm, it feels almost thinner than that, and it is very comfortable. There aren't any harsh edges. The crown doesn't dig too much because the crown's not too big by any means, and yeah, it's just pleasurable to wear, and it is very much of a dressier fit on wrist. Looking at the side profile, again, you do see that slight curve. It doesn't rise up from the wrist much, and it just wears nicely. Before I move on to some other straps, I'm going to compare the Oris, at least in shape, to the Reverso that I have. This is in the grand tie case shape, which is about 26, give or take, millimeters across by 42 in length. So it is slightly bigger in width than the Oris and slightly longer. But I don't think they wear too terribly differently. The Oris is, of course, a little bit more compact feeling, a little bit more simple in its case shape, but not bad by any means. They actually do have the same kind of dial size because Both straps are 19 millimeters, and at least the inspiration for the Reverso is the strap is the exact same width as the dial, and it looks to be true for the Oris as well. I'm also going to put the Reverso on my wrist alone so you can kind of just compare the two wearing shapes. There is the Reverso on my 6.5-inch wrist. I think undoubtedly looks a little bit bigger, especially in length, but not too terribly different. For the first combo, we have this nice Cork strap from Theo and Harris times, John Rousseau. It is nice. It's cool that it has this kind of red underside that matches with the red of the Oris. I mean, not exactly the same shade, but you get what I'm saying. I think it's a fun little combination. It makes it a little less dressy, which is nice because the original Oris strap too is not necessarily alligator or anything, so it doesn't make it too dressy by any means. But I do like how casual the Cork grain makes it. Nice Cork strap adds a little bit of color to the watch. You do get that nice little pop of red depending on how the strap fits you. So I really like this combo. Moving on to a strap that does make the Oris a little bit more serious is this gray alligator from Delugs. I think the gray tones pair really nicely with the red. Doesn't overpower it, makes it nice and clean. And I do like these alligator straps with the kind of larger scales. I think it looks cool. Looks great in my opinion. Works well. Again, the watch conforms really nicely to the wrist. And yeah, that's the alligator. Next we have this nubuck strap from BandR bands. The kind of sandy golden tones I think work really well with the red, and the suede slash nubuck texture dresses it down a little bit. There we have it on wrist, a little bit more casual, a little bit more fun, but I still think it pairs really well. And lastly we have my favorite Archer silicone strap. The white tones play perfectly off the white tones on the dial. The lack of texture makes it just blend in really well and not pop out too much in any way, and it's super comfortable. There we have it. Good combo, I think. Looks great, fits great on wrist, makes it sit really well. Yeah, if you don't have the strap already, give it a try. It's only like 12 bucks. Looking at the Lume here, it is by no means the strongest. There are very small plots, and the hands aren't very large either, but it is fairly legible. I mean, you can see relatively what time it is. It lasts for a decent amount of time because it is BGW9, but don't expect a torch. It is nothing like a Tudor Pelagos or anything like that. It's serviceable, and I think it's well executed for a dress watch. Really quickly bringing in the Snoopy side by side. As you can tell, I mean, it is so much more legible. You're really able to tell that the kind of brightness of the Oris isn't there, but you kind of didn't expect it to have good lume in the first place. So hey, at least it's there and it's done decently. So pros and cons of the watch, and first the immediate pro for me is just going to be like the proportions of the watch itself. When I first heard the dimensions online, it seemed like it'd be a little bit small. It is like a tad smaller in both dimensions than my Reverso, which is the Grand Tie kind of medium size. So I thought, I do like how the Reverso fits. I don't know how much smaller I would like to go, but surprisingly it still fits well for its size. I think it is by no means a large watch, but it definitely falls in line with what size it should be for a dressier watch, for a rectangular watch, for just the design it's going for. So I think Oris really knocked it out of the park and didn't make it too big by any means, which is nice for a quote-unquote like reissue or a watch inspired by vintage watches. Another thing I really like about this watch is the case is interesting. They didn't kind of just cop out and go for a very plain, all polished, no frills rectangle, right? They kind of added a little bit more. They added some stepping to the case, some ornamentation to the case in a way. It looks cool. It adds to the Art Deco feel of the watch. It is just nice on wrist and arguably gives the watch a little bit more presence too. They could have obviously made the dial a little bit bigger rather than making kind of a stepped case, but it is what it is, and I think as it is executed, it is still fairly nice. Another pro for this watch, and I guess the model family in general, is the fact that they gave you some variety in it. There's not just one or two plain colors. You got a very nice red, which you're probably not going to see on most other watch faces. You got a nice blue, which, I mean, there's good blues everywhere, but it's nice to have a blue in the range. You have the kind of white and a grayish color. So you have variety, you have stuff to pick from. If you have a lot of white watches, you now have a red one you can pick if you'd like to. So it's just nice to see them not do just plain black, white, blue, basic colors. Another thing I was pleasantly surprised by in this watch is the strap is actually good. I wasn't too worried because when I had the Oris pointer date that came on that kind of like deer skin looking strap, it was actually a really comfortable strap as well. So thankfully this one follows along that line. It is very supple, very pliable. There's a nice color richness to it. So good job on the strap. And it does have quick release too, which is always fun. My last pro for the watch is just I appreciate that it was created. There's not a lot of super dressy watches in this price category, nonetheless a rectangular square one. So it's nice to see that they're giving a little bit more love to a niche within a niche in the watch community. It's not to everyone's cup of tea, and that's kind of proven by the fact that not a lot of people have talking about it, but it's nice to have it added to the entire collection and give people the choice, because again, there's not a lot of choice out there. Moving on to cons, my first con is it is a little hard to read. The minute hand is a little thick to where the minutes track is, so it blocks off and you can't kind of directly see what minute you're at. It kind of blocks off like 3 different minutes. At the end of the day, it's not too bad. I mean, you can still kind of guess at the time, but it is not something you can perfectly tell to the minute with. The only other real con I have with the watch is that the bottom half of the watch, or at least the bottom half of the kind of inner square, looks a little plain, a little empty. I think that with the Oris text being so high up in that area, it looks a little bit off balance having nothing else at the bottom. They could have added something there like the date the company was founded, or something, or maybe the date the watch originally came out in a rectangle or something. Just something there that would have added and created less negative space. That is personal preference for me. I think it is still nice that they balanced it out with the date window, and they didn't go for like a cut off 6, because the way the date window is, it probably would have cut off the 6. So just nitpicking at this point, because I really don't have many other cons with the watch. Final thoughts, and I did really like this watch. Again, my main apprehensiveness towards the watch was that I didn't know if it was going to fit well. It is very small on paper, and you never know how non-traditional, non-circular cases are going to wear necessarily. And I was happy that in person I thought it was a very nice size. It was very elegant, it looked nice, it was able to very easily slip under a dress cuff, and that's kind of what it's meant for. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I just appreciate Oris making this watch. It's not something that I think is going to be a massive seller for them. I don't think it's something that's garnering a lot of interest, but it's a cool watch, it's a well-made watch, and I think it's nice to have more dressy, more dedicatedly dressy watches just in the sub $2,000–3,000 price range, because it is a little sparse. Kind of around there, tool watches really reign supreme. So it's nice to have a little bit more options for the people like me who prefer that style. Most direct competition for this watch I think would be either the Nomos Tetra, which, although very much more square in shape, is around the same $2,000 price point. I would argue, because I do own a Nomos Tetra, the dials are a little bit more flatter, a little bit more plain looking, but if you find a color you really like, it's still a great option and it's still a great watch overall. And then maybe getting like a used Cartier tank for maybe around the same price, maybe a quartz one if you're lucky. But again, there's not a lot out there, and I think this is a nice offering for the price that it's at, and you can undoubtedly probably get a discount at your local AD. Overall, in person, I enjoyed the watch much more than I thought I would. It is well built, it is well proportioned, and on wrist, it just makes sense. So if you end up getting one, let me know. If you like the watch or don't like the watch, let me know why, and hope you got something out of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another one.